Welcome to the K in Clarity podcast. I'm the host, Mezue. During this episode, we're joined by Ted Finn, founder of Innovative Wellness Solutions and Uplift Ventures. Ted Finn has been instrumental in developing holistic, science-based solutions for travel health and human performance within the digital health and wellness space. Drawing on over 30 years of entrepreneurial experience across North America, Europe, and Asia, Finn co-founded Uplift Ventures to address the challenges of jet lag, circadian disruption, and overall well-being for frequent travelers and shift workers. Through innovative mobile applications and natural evidence-based approaches, Finn's work is helping people reset their body clocks and maintain peak performance despite demanding traveling schedules. Finn's expertise in global operations, product innovation, and brand development stems from a career that includes founding and scaling AmAsian International, pioneering high-quality comfort footwear manufacturing in Asia, and leading several successful ventures in the wellness and footwear industries. His commitment to health is further reflected in his active lifestyle as a cyclist, skier, and endurance athlete, and in his leadership roles supporting community wellness and adaptive sports. Finn's passion for integrating technology, science, and holistic wellness continues to drive meaningful advancements in travel health, making him a recognized thought leader in the digital health space. In this conversation, he discusses his journey as a serial entrepreneur and the development of WellSoul, a smart, connected insole aimed at improving health and mobility. He shares his insights on the importance of movement, the impact of global experiences on his entrepreneurial mindset, and the challenges of integrating wearable technology into traditional healthcare systems. The conversation also touches on sustainability in the footwear industry and lessons learned in product development. If this is your first time tuning in, here's the gist. The healthcare industry is buzzing with innovations, but there's a lot of noise and misconceptions out there. That's where we come in. Because of my experience in the healthcare ecosystem, I've gained a unique vantage point into the industry's inner workings. We're bringing you the conversations that typically happen behind boardrooms and strategy sessions, the real challenges, innovative solutions, and game-changing insights that are reshaping healthcare as we know it. On this podcast, we're bringing you face-to-face with the industry-leading healthcare founders, executives, and innovators. We're talking about the nitty-gritty of building and scaling healthcare companies, the hurdles they've overcome, and the strategies that have led to their success. More importantly, we dive into the personal challenges that come with trying to change a system as complex as U.S. healthcare. So whether you're a healthcare entrepreneur, a medical professional, or just someone passionate about the future of healthcare, this podcast is your backstage pass to the minds shaping the industry. Now let's have Ted tell us a little bit about themselves. Welcome, Ted, to the K in Clarity podcast. For the people listening, can you give them a brief overview of who you are and what it is you do?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on this morning. I really appreciate it. Ted Finn, I'm co-founder and chairman of Innovative Wellness Systems. We're building a smart connected insole called the WellSoul. But my background is a serial entrepreneur, 4-time founder, 2 in the footwear industry, hence the smart insole, and now really focused on human health and performance.
Perfect. So typically we like to do an icebreaker before we jump into the main questions. And so my first icebreaker for you is, what would be a biomechanical sensor that you would maybe implant into a shoe to detect, some type of condition? It doesn't have to be foot related, but what would it be and why?
Well, that's a great question. Our focus is currently on sensors around movement and balance. So if there was one thing that we could predict or change about health, I think it would be around balance and falling, in the sense that at any age, but especially if you're elderly, falling is a serious problem and affects everybody. And as we like to say, sad but true, gravity is not your friend. So we're working with the latest sensor technology, but it is moving so fast. We're looking at the next generation of sensors, and it's pretty unbelievable what's happening in that work.
I think with what I've heard, and what we spoke about previously from your experience, going into biomechanics, sourcing, footwear, also smart sensors, what would you really say is your core philosophy that ties all these ventures together that you've done in your life?
Question. I would say that it's really the time that I spent in the footwear industry. I spent most of my career there. I was trained on not only the business part of footwear, but actually how to make and design a shoe in terms of the types of skills and craftsmanship involved in making a pair of shoes. And being in that business and producing, we designed, developed, sourced, and produced footwear in 10 different countries and sold them in 25 different countries. So I got a chance to go all over the world and pioneer sourcing and footwear in many countries. And it was a real learning experience. And feet and sizes vary so we learned a lot about feet and biomechanics along the way.
Yeah, I know we also discussed, your time in, Asia, your time in Europe and the US. What would you say is something within those experiences as well that kind of affected your approach towards entrepreneurial endeavors and health?
Well, I would say first of all, I am really, really grateful to have had the opportunity to have lived and worked in different countries. It's a real eye-opener. If you grow up in the United States, it's a big country. Yeah, it's not like I live in Europe and I can travel 100 or 200 miles and be in a different country or a different culture. So when I was young, my dad came home one day and said, "We're moving." And I thought, okay, we live outside of Boston. We moved from the next town to this town. I'm like, okay, where are we moving? Oh, we're moving to Italy. And I was in high school. I spent 3 years of high school in Florence, Italy. And for myself and my family, it was the best thing that ever happened. It opened our eyes to an entire new world, new culture. We were strangers in a different land, and after a few years we felt like locals, and that created an openness or a curiosity to explore the world and go and work and do in different places. And I am very grateful that I had that opportunity and pursued that passion, which led to Europe and then back to the States and eventually to Asia.
I know from what I believe, you have at least 2.5 million miles logged. What are like the biomechanical demands of all that, and kind of how you've thought about your entire experiences there?
Well, the 2.5 million air miles was a lot of flights. One thing I learned from all of that travel, and especially those long flights, moving your body consistently is the most important thing for humans. Our evolution, entire history over the last 100,000 years involved movement. And today, with technology and with working at home, working in offices, sitting all the time, movement is almost a luxury. And that's had a lot of effects on us over, especially in the past decades. Flights are hard. Long flights are really hard because and you're cramped and you're sitting. So I'd get off the plane and I would always walk. I wouldn't take the escalators, or I would sometimes take the stairs. And moving your body, getting that movement in, it's good for your circulation, it's good for your oxygenation, and it helps with your biomechanics, because when we sit too much, our biomechanics can get out of alignment.
Yeah, I know that happened to me as well. One time I was traveling to Tokyo, and that was probably the longest flight that I've ever had. And I was just like, I felt a little off.
Right.
after. And so I know this is not medical advice, but besides walking, is there any other advice that you'd give to people just on things that they need to do after, a flight?
Well, there's that. That's a there's a whole world of advice around travel, but I would say that hydration is super important when you travel. If you're in an airplane for a long time, consider it the equivalent of being in the desert. The humidity in the cabins is, because of the pressurization and the humidity is very low. And when we get dehydrated, a lot of our non-essential systems in our body shut down. So one of the great benefits of working in the health and wellness space is I get to learn from some of the best people in the field. And it's really, really eye-opening because it's common sense, but it's not always commonly known.
Yeah, that's so true. Um, I think I also want to tie this into your experience in WellSoul. I know we had discussed your friend's dealings with a diabetic foot ulcer and how that also affected them in your experience. And so I would say, how has your personal connection there really driven, your technical approach as well to preventative care and the pursuit of that?
Well, the WellSoul and how it came about, in a sense, is it's an interesting story. As I mentioned, I spent probably 30 years in the footwear business, making mostly a combination of fashion and comfort shoes. And we always were successful in that business because we were innovative, we were hard workers, and we were pioneers. And that's how we ended up in so many different countries and pioneering new places of production. Eventually, we exited that business, started another one, and I realized that we were essentially making pretty much the same product that we had been making for the last 30 years. There were some technical improvements, there was some innovation, but it was very small. And decided that we started to see the initial impact. About 10 years ago, we really started to see the initial impact of 3D printing. And I started to think about how could we produce insoles and or eventually footwear using 3D printing, and started a project here in Boston with using some of the facilities at Mass Challenge for startups to develop a 3D printed insole that could be used as a custom insole in your shoes for runners or eventually as an orthotic, and was building that, and then still in the footwear business. And a friend of mine and a customer in Boston, a dear friend, developed diabetic foot ulcers. And I had no idea what that was and what it meant, but along his health journey, I learned. So for many people who have diabetes and there's other conditions as well, they develop poor circulation and nerve damage in their extremities, in particular their feet, which means they lose feeling in their feet. So for you or I, we go out for a walk, we get a pebble in our shoe, or our shoe is rubbing against us. We feel it. Stop, we adjust, we check. And for people with peripheral neuropathy, they don't feel it. So those sores can become ulcers. And because they have poor circulation in their feet, the ability to heal is impaired. And what happens is many of those lead to amputations. And that's what happened with my friend. And he had to close his business, and eventually it shortened his life. It was just, and I really didn't, understand it until it happened to somebody close to me. And I saw during the treatment, that he was getting incredible medical treatment, but that the footwear industry or the footwear solutions around that problem were virtually non-existent. Or here's a pair of shoes that are super wide that you can wear that look like they came from the 1950s and nobody wanted to wear. And I said to myself, oh my God, we can do better than that. So I started doing some research, and the idea of the WellSoul, making the WellSoul smart, putting sensors in it that could help collect data and connect the feet to the person because they lost feeling, and even connect that to their clinician to tell them what's going on in terms of pressure or temperature, different metrics. That's where the initial idea from the WellSoul came. So I took that 3D printed insole, and we have a really family friend, physician at Beth Israel Medical Center, the smartest, most amazing doctor that I've ever known. In fact, he helped save my mom's life once along the way. And I went to him, I said, Bob, I have this crazy idea, to make this smart insole and to see if we can make a difference in diabetes. And we had a number of conversations, and he had worked in a number of specialties. And he said, Ted, this is not such a crazy idea. I see these types of cases all the time, and they're devastating to the individual, to the families. They cost the earth, to the medical system. They cost people their lives. So he agreed to help. He agreed to become an advisor and help us along the journey. And that's how the WellSoul started.
Beautiful story. Beautiful story. You guys also have, a lot of experts on your team. So how do you synthesize, the different beats of data from PTs, podiatrists, clinicians to make sure that you guys are really building out the best product there is on the market?
That's a good question. What we find is that, first of all, any startup is hard. But to build a wearable is particularly hard because we have to be experts at both hardware and software. And to build in the medical space or in the health space has also its own unique challenges. So we decided early on that our North Star was to really solve some major health issues. And because I went to Bob at Beth Israel Hospital at the beginning, I realized I don't know anything. I mean, I'm an amateur. I'm an amateur when it comes to navigating the medical system. And we have so many high-level clinicians in Boston that are so well trained that it made perfect sense for us to incorporate the different stakeholders in the medical system. So we have a doctor on our team who comes from emergency medicine, who sees everything. We have podiatrists who are just specializing in the feet, surgery, orthotics specialists. We have PT and chiropractic specialties as well. And it's a lot because there's a lot of use cases for what we are building. Our feet are the foundation of our body and our movement. And when they go right, they're wonderful. And when they go wrong, there's a host of things that can go wrong. So we felt that being able to bring in these experts to leverage their expertise, understand the different problems that they address and serve, would help guide us to figure out what are the early use cases for the WellSoul. Because as much as we would love to solve the problem of diabetic foot ulcers, that is a very serious life and death problem. It would require us to be a full-fledged, medical or diagnostic device, which is a very complex, expensive, and long course for us to arrive there, which we're committed to arriving there. But as a startup, you have to survive, you have to generate revenue, you have to navigate all types of challenges. So that's part of the reason why we brought in a lot of specialties, so that we would be able to learn from them, we would be able to rely on them, and we could figure out in those different specialties, where would be the early use cases for us to get started?
I know something as well that you guys do really well is the mobility-centric design. And so why do you think mobility-centric design is so critical for aging populations, and how do you guys really go about addressing that within WellSoul?
Well, there's no question that demographically we're an aging population. People are living longer. And it's clear that movement and mobility is a linchpin to independence. I mean, we've seen it with our parents or grandparents that, once you lose your mobility, it's hard to remain independent. And I'd say one of the biggest issues we face as a modern society is how do we keep our elders mobile, independent, at home as long as possible. And I believe that a wearable like the WellSoul that is comfortable in your shoes, that you want to wear because it feels good, and provides data on your movement, can help to understand where you are with your movement, can connect you personally to your movement, can connect you and your movement to your family or your clinician, so that your clinician has an idea of what's actually going on with you when you're not in the office. And clinicians are under a tremendous time crunch. So the amount of time that they have to spend with their patients is limited. So I think one of the great benefits and one of the great contributions that we could make outside of addressing a particular disease like diabetic foot ulcers would be to collect data at scale on movement, on individuals, outside the office, in the wild, and use that to create personalized wellness plans for them or identify emerging problems. Medical literature notes that certain problems and certain conditions are visible in your movement, in your gait, before they become evident elsewhere.
Beyond step counts, what do you think is as well some underutilized health metrics that could really be essential towards preventative care, as you mentioned?
Well, I think there's so much around balance and gait and pressure in terms of how we move that we do not have data at scale from individuals. I believe, humans are just incredibly adaptable. So a lot of people are walking around, are moving, and they're adapting to maybe one leg is a little shorter than the other, or maybe they had an injury in high school around an ankle or a knee that didn't require surgery, but it impacted their biomechanics and their movement. Because we're seeing a tremendous amount of people getting replacements of parts, body parts, knees, hips in particular, who may not have, it may not have come from a long-term career or athletic activity. It might have come just because they're a little bit out of alignment, not enough to create an acute situation where you'd go to the doctor. But over time, your body adjusts, and then it's just it just wears out. And those types of problems, if they're not acute, everybody just says, I'll deal with it until it becomes something that I can't deal with. So I believe that in addition to problems related to a specific disease or an injury or injury recovery, that we can also improve biomechanics. I mean, think about it. If you I have a son who's in his 20s. I mean, he should live to 100 years old, and ideally, he should he should keep all of his original body parts. I mean, so how can we help him and millions of others do that and live an active life of movement, which helps address other chronic health conditions we face as a society.
As well, what do you think is the biggest hurdle in having, traditional healthcare systems to be able to adopt biomechanical tech like the WellSoul?
It's a good question. I'd say, we're in the early innings of wearable technology, and we're starting to see wearables up here on the wrists and the fingers being approved for medical conditions, for monitoring. And I believe that's the pathway for us. The pathway is that you would start as a monitoring device to help monitor a condition. So an example of that would be, I just had a severe ankle injury, or I just had a very expensive knee replacement, and I have a rehabilitation program because I want to get back to living my life, moving, being pain-free. And we could, in that space, we could be, in the health space, we could be a monitoring device for that. There's other use cases as well in the non-health space that might not require the medical approvals, because one of the big challenges in the medical space is reimbursement, and getting to reimbursement, or is a, we've talked to some leading experts in the field. It's a major challenge. If there are other people in the space that are advancing technology and wearables for monitoring and eventually for reimbursement, that's a pathway.
Yeah. A quick call out. I know we're both fans of Whoop as well and what they're doing on that side.
All right.
So that's
definitely a fan of Whoop. Excited to see their I already ordered their version 5 that just came out. They're a Boston company. We're from Boston, so we're big supporters. And let's, also listen, we're learning, here at the WellSoul, we are definitely learning from Whoop and others who have been at this for a very long time and really advanced the field.
I know you touched on a little bit about 3D printing. I guess what unique advantages do you think 3D printing really offers towards biomechanical solutions, and how does that really going to look in the future?
I think it's going to make all the difference in the world for us. Additionally, in footwear and insoles, there was a tremendous amount of equipment investment up front to produce them affordably and at scale. So that could be, molds and cutting dies and etc. And that's what we did in the footwear industry for many years, mostly overseas. The advantage of 3D printing, especially for an earlier stage company, is that we can make short runs, we can experiment, we can iterate on those without the cost, time, and burden of having to make molds and other equipment. So it's a huge advantage. We are planning to produce the WellSoul here, as close to here locally as we can. After a career of producing offshore, very much committed to doing this here, being very hands-on, and definitely leveraging 3D printing. There's a lot of advances. There's some incredible companies here in the Boston area pushing those. And also a lot more materials available than there used to be.
Yeah. I know you were one of, the pioneers of Asian sourcing in the 80s. And so I guess for you, how do you think today's footwear industry can really align the profit motives of a business to the health outcomes that you would see as well in the health industry?
It's a good question. We all, most of us wear shoes, but our feet are very individual. And the nature of the footwear industry is to produce at scale, provide quality products at affordable prices. I think that, and there's not a universal standard of fit in the footwear industry. I mean, so, when you go to buy shoes, and my advice to, being in the footwear industry all those years, my advice to anybody buying shoes is always put that shoe on the first time, close your eyes, and ask yourself, does it feel great? And if the answer is not yes, definitely, move on. Because it's, fit is very variable. Now, I see footwear companies experimenting with more individualized and personalized options in production. I don't know. It's going to take a while for that to scale, and there's also going to be an affordability issue. So there's definitely a number of issues in the footwear industry today around sustainability, and a little bit also around affordability that relates to what people can afford in their family budgets for shoes.
I know you talked about sustainability as well. What are your thoughts on a biodegradable, solutions for footwear? I know I saw something, I believe yesterday, which was Vivo, them having a pretty unique product as well that could be working in there. I don't know what the use case would be, but what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's absolutely positively the way to go, and I think that what Vivo and a few others are doing is the future and is really important. And I can tell you, sadly, that the amount of chemicals and petrochemicals, in particular, in footwear is considerable. Companies are making strides and innovations to reduce that. Sadly, at the end of a useful life of your shoe, it ends up in a landfill. So that is not a sustainable solution for our planet going forward, because there are, I believe, 13 billion pairs of shoes sold a year in the world. That's a lot of shoes and a lot of different use cases. So I would say if you're able to support brands that are pushing new technologies and sustainability like Vivo, I'm all for that. And if you're able to buy quality shoes, your feet will thank you, and they generally last longer. So that would be my advice.
Beautiful advice. One of the other questions I want to ask you before we probably go into the lightning round is, what is some learnings that you've had in product development for footwear that you think other leaders can take from your experience to maybe be able to implement in their own businesses?
It's a good question, because footwear is complex to make. There's a lot of different components, materials, and industries involved. And at the same time, we're part of fashion. So to be a footwear designer, which I was not, but my father was a footwear designer, and I worked with some of the best designers in the world, is both an art and a science. It really is. Because making something that is fashionable, that looks great, that performs, that's comfortable, is hard, because there's friction. There's friction between those different components.
Absolutely. It's how can you strike that perfect balance, right?
And, there's always trade-offs.
Yeah.
There's always trade-offs. So we learned a lot along the way, and usually you learn more from your mistakes than your successes.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, I think it's time for the lightning round. And so my first question for you is, with your company, if there's an impact that you can look upon within the next 10 years that you guys are going to make, what would you exactly say that would be?
Say that the biggest difference that we could make would be in helping people maintain and sustain their mobility.
On to my next question is, what do you think is maybe a very valuable skill that entrepreneurs could have in merging, healthcare and wearable technology to really build out and produce some of the best products out there?
I think you have to build a great team, because there are just so many. You can't be an expert in everything. You cannot be an expert in everything. So this being able to orchestrate or lead a team or direct an orchestra, because you have incredible healthcare execs, you've got software, you've got hardware, and then you have all of the startup skills. There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you go about, sourcing and finding the best teammates to go along the journey?
I've had a lifetime of experience. I'm fortunate to have learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes. And part of it is, we're in a great ecosystem here in Boston. There are just so many amazing people. And I just started going to events. I wasn't entirely sure what we were going to do on the WellSoul, but I just started going to events, got involved in the ecosystem, started meeting people. People stepped out and helped me, which was amazing. I still do that, and I'm still trying to learn something new every day.
Beautiful. My third question for you is, what's the biggest myth that you see in the adoption of wearable technology, such as, Whoop, such as, different types of footwear, as the WellSoul, and actually consumers wanting to adopt this into their daily lives?
I'd say because we're in the early stages, so there are certainly people out there that are early adopters because they want the latest technology or the latest information. But I think the most important thing for wearables is, how can we provide the user some actionable data so that it makes a difference for them?
And my last question for you is, what emerging tech do you think will have such a great impact on foot health that you see maybe within the next 5 years?
Well, I know it's number one on everybody's list, but I would say it's the combination of machine learning and AI. And here's why. The sensors in our WellSoul are collecting so much information on your movement. It's the amount of data that is being collected is absolutely positively. And using the tools of machine learning and eventually AI will allow us to gain insights and see things that we otherwise could have never seen, and then be able to personalize it for you. Because you and I are, we both share a lot. We are, biomechanically, we're all different.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Well, Ted, thank you for your time again. I know we discussed a lot, but what are your final thoughts on everything that we discussed that you can share with the audience?
Well, first, thanks for having me today. I really appreciate it. And to the audience, I would say, I think that the wearable technology that we and other people are developing can provide you a path to take control of your own health and well-being. That the data that we're collecting, that the tools that we're building can really support you in your journey to being healthy and extending your health span as long as possible.
Perfect. Thank you again, Ted. Where can people choose to, follow you and your journey at WellSoul if they choose to do so?
Well, you can find us. You can find the WellSoul and Innovative Wellness Systems and myself on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to connect. And we are wellsoul.co online.
Okay, perfect. Well, Ted, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Of course. Bye.